The lake was glass that morning. Not a ripple, just gray water and pine trees and the sound of a loon somewhere out past the dock, doing what loons do, calling out to nobody in particular, perfectly at ease with the silence. I was sitting in an old wooden chair on the porch of a fishing cabin I'd rented 3 weeks earlier, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and my dog Rusty was asleep at my feet with his chin resting on my boot. 63 years old, a little gray in the beard, a little stiff in the knees, and I was sitting there on the 4th of July weekend, thinking that I had not felt this peaceful in maybe 15 years. My phone was on the small table beside me, face down. It started ringing at 6:40. I looked at the screen. I set it back down. I watched a heron land on a log at the edge of the water and stand there like it owned everything it could see. The phone rang again at 6:52, then twice in the next 10 minutes. Then it stopped. Then it started again. I want to tell you something, friends, before I tell you this story. I'm not a man who enjoys conflict. Never have been. I spent most of my adult life being the person who smoothed things over, who picked up the check, who said it's fine when it was not fine, who drove 4 hours to make sure everyone else had a good time. I was the kind of man who believed, for a very long time, that keeping the peace was the same thing as being loved. I was wrong about that. It took me a long time to understand just how wrong. This is the story of the summer I stopped paying for the family reunion and what happened at the rental house in the Smoky Mountains when 6:40 p.m. rolled around and I wasn't there. Let me go back to the beginning, because you need to understand how we got here. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I live in a mid-sized town in central Ohio, in the same house I bought when I was 31 years old and thought the future was going to go a certain way. I worked for 31 years in facilities management for a manufacturing company, not a glamorous job, not a job people ask about at parties, but a solid job. Honest work. I was good at it. I retired 2 years ago with a decent pension, some savings, and a lot of plans I hadn't quite figured out yet. I've been divorced for 16 years. My ex-wife, Pamela, and I separated when our kids were teenagers. It wasn't a war, nobody threw dishes. Nobody said the worst things you can say. It just ended, quietly and completely, the way some marriages do. We divided things up. She got the house. I got the dog and the truck and the understanding that I would remain involved in the kids' lives in whatever way they needed. I have 2 adult children. My son, Derek, is 34. He works in pharmaceutical sales and makes considerably more money than I ever did. He lives in Charlotte with his wife, Kelsey, and their 2 kids. My daughter, Amanda, is 31. She's a project manager for a tech company in Nashville. She is smart, ambitious, and has never once in her adult life offered to split a dinner bill when I was at the table. I want to be fair here. I love my children. I want that on the record. What I'm about to tell you is not a story about hating your family. It's about what happens when love becomes a transaction, and you're always the one funding it. The family reunion started 12 years ago. It was my idea, actually. The divorce had scattered everyone. Pamela had moved closer to her sister. Derek was already in Charlotte. Amanda was finishing college. I felt the family fragmenting, and I panicked a little, the way fathers do. So I suggested a summer trip, all of us together, somewhere nice. My treat. That first year, I rented a house on a lake in Tennessee, 4 bedrooms, a dock, a grill. It cost me about $2,200 for the week, and I thought it was worth every penny. We fished. We played cards. The grandkids, well, there were no grandkids yet. Just Derek and his then-girlfriend Kelsey swam in the lake until dark. Amanda brought a college friend, and I didn't mind. We ate dinner together every night. I grilled steaks on the 4th. It was a good week, a genuinely good week. And so the next year, I did it again. Different house, same lake, same arrangement. Gerald pays. Everyone shows up. Year 3, the house was bigger, 6 bedrooms, because Kelsey was now Derek's wife, and they wanted a room to themselves with their newborn, which I completely understood. I found a beautiful place. A little more expensive. Still, my treat. Year 4, Amanda mentioned, not asked, mentioned that the house didn't have a hot tub, and that the place she'd seen on the rental site for about $400 more per night did. She said it while scrolling through her phone at breakfast, not even looking up. Derek said that sounded great. Kelsey agreed immediately. I added the hot tub house to the reservation. That was my first mistake. Not the only one, but the first one I remember clearly now. Here's what I want to say about that moment, and I want you to hear me on this, friends. I am not angry at my daughter for mentioning the hot tub. I am angry at myself for treating her mention as a request and her request as a command. The problem was never that she asked. The problem was that I never said no. Not once. Not that year, not the year after. Not for 12 years running. And when you never say no, you eventually stop being a person and start being a resource. Year 5, Derek handled the rental search himself and presented me with a house that cost $6,200 for the week. Fully stocked kitchen, mountain views, game room, fire pit. Beautiful. He showed me photos like a man presenting a business proposal. I said yes. Year 6, Pamela joined us. She and I were civil. We had managed to achieve that much, and the kids wanted their mother there, so I said of course. I paid for her portion without being asked. She thanked me once, on the first day, and then it was simply assumed. Year 7, Amanda's boyfriend Travis came. He was unemployed at the time, working on a music career that showed no signs of developing into one. And he ate and drank and sat by the pool for 7 days without offering a single dollar or a single word of thanks. He called me Gerald. He is still with Amanda. He still calls me Gerald. Year 8. Derek mentioned that the house I'd booked didn't have enough parking for everyone's vehicles, and could I book the one with the larger driveway instead? That one cost $800 more. I booked it. Year 9. The reunion fell on a week when I was dealing with a knee injury and honestly didn't feel well enough to travel. I mentioned this. Derek said, "Dad, we've already planned around those dates. The kids have been looking forward to it." Amanda sent me a link to a knee brace on Amazon. I drove 7 hours to Tennessee and spent 3 days limping around a rental property, managing everyone else's good time. Year 10, Pamela brought her sister without asking anyone. Her sister has a personality, like a weather event. I paid for her portion also. Year 11, I started keeping a quiet, mental ledger. Not because I planned to do anything with it, just because something in me had started paying attention in a way it hadn't before. By my rough accounting, I had spent somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 on 12 years of family reunions. $60,000 to $70,000 on a family that, when I walked into a room, checked their phones. Year 12 was last summer. In February, Derek started a group text. The message said, "Smoky Mountains again this year? Dad, same as always?" Same as always. I read that message 4 times. I set the phone down. I picked it up again. I typed, "Sounds good," and pressed send, because I was not yet ready to be who I needed to be. But something had shifted. I could feel it, some quiet thing in my chest that had been politely patient for a very long time and was no longer interested in being polite. In March, Derek sent a link to a rental property in Gatlinburg. 7 bedrooms, 2 decks, a game room, a hot tub, mountain views, a private movie room, and a chef's kitchen. $9,400 for the week. He sent it at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. He included the message, "This place looks perfect. Already getting inquiries, might want to move fast." I stared at that message for a long time. $9,400. I thought about my pension. I thought about the savings account I'd spent 2 decades building. I thought about the fishing cabin I'd always told myself I'd rent for a week by myself someday, just me and a dog and some quiet water. I thought about 12 years of same as always and what that phrase had actually meant, which was, "We expect you to pay, and we expect you not to make it awkward by talking about it." I did not respond to the group text that day. I did not respond the next day either. 3 days later, Amanda sent a follow-up. "Dad, Derek needs to know about the house. Can you confirm?" I read it. I set it down. A week after that, Derek called me. I let it go to voicemail. His message was friendly, efficient. "Hey Dad, just need a confirmation on the rental so we can lock it in. Also, Kelsey's parents might join us this year if that's okay. We'd want to add another bedroom, so Probably looking at a place around 11,000. Let me know. $11,000. Kelsey's parents, whom I had met 4 times in my life, were now potentially guests at my expense, at a vacation I was no longer sure I wanted to attend. I sat with all of this for another 2 weeks. I went through my days, my quiet, retired Ohio days, and I thought about what I actually wanted, not what the family needed, not what would keep the peace. What I wanted, and what I wanted, I realized, was to be somewhere quiet, somewhere with water, somewhere with Rusty and a fishing rod, and absolutely nobody asking me to confirm anything. In early April, I called my old friend Warren, who I've known since we were 22 years old, and who has never once told me what I wanted to hear when what I wanted to hear was wrong. I told him the whole thing. The 12 years, the $60,000+, the group text, the $11,000 house with the private movie room. Warren listened to all of it without interrupting, which is something he's good at. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Gerald, have you considered the possibility that you've been buying a family that doesn't actually know you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. He said, "You're 63 years old. You're retired. You've got Rusty and a pension and 2 good knees. Well, 1 good knee. What do you actually want to do this 4th of July?" I told him. He said, "Then do that." In the first week of April, I called a fishing cabin rental company in northern Michigan that I'd found online, a place run by an older couple who rented 3 quadrilles on a private lake about 40 miles from the nearest town. I booked the smallest cabin for 10 days, starting July 1st. It cost me $980 for the entire stay, including the boat. I did not tell my family. I want to pause here and address something, friends, because I know some of you are already thinking it. I know some of you are going to say, and several people in my life have said, "Gerald, you should have told them. You had months. You could have simply said you weren't paying this year and let them plan accordingly." And you know what? You're right. I've thought about this more than almost anything else in this whole situation. I could have called Derek in February, or March, or April. I could have sent my own message to that group text. I could have said, "I love you all, and I'm not funding this year. Make your own plans." I thought about doing that. More than once, I had the phone in my hand. But here's the thing I kept coming back to. I had given them signals for 12 years. Small ones, quiet ones, but signals. The year I mentioned my knee and was told the dates were already set. The year I didn't respond to 3 messages in a row, and nobody called to ask if I was okay. They called to follow up on the reservation. The year Travis showed up without contributing $1 and left without a word of thanks and nobody said anything. I had been telling them something was wrong for a long time. In the language of a man who doesn't like conflict, quietly, indirectly, with increasing silence, I had been saying, "Something isn't right here. Does anyone want to talk about it?" Nobody had asked. So I made a decision that I'm not entirely proud of, and I'm not going to pretend it was the mature and correct choice. But I also understand why I made it. I needed to know what would happen when the money was simply gone, when I simply wasn't there. I needed to see, not in an argument, not in a conversation I'd been avoiding for years, but plainly, concretely, what the reunion looked like when the ATM didn't show up. The answer arrived on the 4th of July at 6:40 in the evening. I want to describe that morning to you, friends, because I want you to understand what I was feeling when all of this unfolded. I woke up at 5:30, because that's when I wake up. Rusty was already sitting up, looking at me, which is what he does. I made coffee on a small propane stove. I took my cup and the old wool blanket from the bed, and I went out to the porch and sat in the wooden chair and watched the lake come out of the dark. The water was completely still. There were no other cabins on this lake. The nearest neighbor was a couple from Wisconsin who had the cabin at the far end and who left for town every morning before 7. I'd spoken to them twice, once when they offered me some of the walleye they'd caught, and once when the husband noticed my Ohio plates and we talked for about 20 minutes about absolutely nothing important, which was the best conversation I'd had in years. I had spent 3 days fishing. I had caught enough to eat well. I had read 2 books. I had slept 8 hours every night in a bed that wasn't mine. which is the only bed I ever truly sleep well in. Rusty had discovered that the dock was his favorite place on earth and spent most of each afternoon lying on it in the sun, which I found deeply relatable. I had not looked at my phone with any intention. I'd left it inside, mostly, face down on the kitchen counter, the way you'd leave a bad habit in another room. Around mid-morning on the 4th, I took the small aluminum boat out on the lake and fished for 2 hours and caught 3 smallmouth bass and released them all. I ate lunch on the porch, a cheese sandwich and some chips, and the last of a peach I'd bought at a farm stand 2 days earlier. I read for a while. I fell asleep in the chair for about 45 minutes, which is something I've never allowed myself to do in my normal life for reasons I can no longer justify. When I woke up, it was late afternoon. The light had gone golden the way it does on summer evenings in Michigan, that particular thick honey color that makes everything look like it's being remembered rather than experienced. Rusty was on the dock. I could hear him snoring from where I sat. I thought about Derek and Amanda and Kelsey and the grandkids and Travis and whatever was happening at a rental house in the Smoky Mountains at that moment. I thought about it the way you think about weather that's passing through a town you used to live in, aware of it, not indifferent to it, but separate from it in a way that felt new and important. And then my phone started ringing. The first call was Derek, 6:40 p.m. I know because I looked at the screen and set it back down. I wasn't ready to answer. I'm not sure I was ready to confirm yet that I'd made a real decision and not just a temporary disappearance. He called twice more in the next 15 minutes. Then Kelsey called. Then an unfamiliar number I would find out later it was Kelsey's mother, who I had never previously spoken with on the phone, and who was apparently now at the rental house in Gatlinburg, waiting to check into the room I had not paid for. Then Amanda called. Then Travis, which surprised me, because Travis had my number in his phone, which meant Pamela must have given it to him at some point, which opened a whole other set of thoughts I set aside for later. Then Derek called again. I sat with the phone in my lap and the lake going dark, and Rusty finally coming back from the dock and settling at my feet, and I made myself feel the full weight of what was happening across 700 miles. A family standing outside a beautiful house in the mountains with their luggage on a holiday weekend, realizing the reservation wasn't confirmed, and the money wasn't transferred, and Dad wasn't answering. I want to be honest with you, friends. It was not a comfortable feeling. I'm not built for drama. I'm not a man who enjoys watching people suffer, including people who have treated me carelessly. There was no celebration in that moment. There was something quieter than that, a kind of grief, I think. For the family I'd been trying to purchase for 12 years, and the real reckoning that came from finally putting the checkbook away. At 7:15 I answered Derek's 6th call. He spoke before I could say a word. His voice was tight in the way it gets when he's trying to manage his anger in front of other people. Dad, where are you? The house, the owners are saying there's no payment on record. We've been standing out here for an hour. What's going on? I said, I'm in Michigan. He said, what? I said, I rented a cabin in Michigan. I've been here since July 1st. There was a silence that lasted long enough that I could hear someone talking in the background, Kelsey, or possibly her mother. I couldn't tell. Derek said, Dad, we're all here. The kids are tired. Kelsey's parents drove 4 hours. What do you mean you're in Michigan? I said, I decided not to fund the reunion this year. Another silence. Then he said, more quietly, you didn't say anything. And I said, no, I didn't. And you didn't either. For 12 years. About a lot of things that deserve to be said. He didn't respond to that. I heard him move away from the group, a door closing, and then his voice dropped, and the anger stopped being managed. He said, do you know how this looks? You couldn't pick up the phone and tell us? Mom is here. Kelsey's parents are here. The kids are exhausted. You just didn't say anything and let us drive all the way here? I said, I know. That part I'm not proud of. And I meant it. I want you to know I meant it. He said, so what are we supposed to do? I said, I think that's a genuinely good question, Derek. I think you're going to figure it out. He hung up. Amanda called 11 minutes later. Her approach was different. She came in softer, which is her method when she suspects that direct pressure won't work. She said, Dad, we're all a little confused. Can you just help us understand what happened? I told her the same thing I told Derek, in roughly the same words. She said, I mean, okay, I hear you, but you could have told us earlier, like months earlier. We could have made different plans. I said, you're right. I should have said something directly, and I didn't, and that was on me. But I also want you to think about February, when Derek sent that text that said, same as always, Dad. I want you to think about what that phrase means when it comes from your children to your father. She was quiet. I said, Amanda, I love you. I have always loved you, but I need you to understand something that I haven't known how to say for a long time. I have not felt like your father at these reunions for years. I have felt like the man who pays for things. And I don't know how to keep showing up as that man. She said, Dad, I said, you don't have to respond right now. I just wanted you to hear it. She said she needed to go help figure out the housing situation. She said she would call me later. She did not call me later. She did call me 3 weeks after that, and I'll get to that. The last call that evening was from Pamela. She called at 8:47 p.m., which meant things had settled enough that she'd found a quiet corner somewhere to call from, which told me they'd figured out some kind of lodging. Her voice was even, which is the voice she uses when she's decided on an approach. She said, Gerald, I want to be honest with you. I said, all right. She said, I think what you did tonight was cruel. I think you could have said something, and you chose not to. And a lot of people are very upset right now, including the grandchildren, who don't understand why Grandpa Gerald isn't here. I said, I know, and I'm sorry they're having a hard night. I genuinely am. She said, then why? I said, because I needed to know what it looked like when I wasn't there. Not as someone you'd miss, I didn't have any illusions about that. I needed to know what it looked like when the money wasn't there. And now I know. There was a long pause, and I'll give Pamela this. She's smart enough to recognize when something true has been said. She didn't argue with me. She said, that's a sad thing to have needed to find out. I said, yeah, it really is. We got off the phone shortly after that. I sat on the porch until it was fully dark. Rusty put his head in my lap. The loon called out across the water, and something on the far shore answered. Here is what I want to tell you, friends. Now that we're at the end of this thing, I have thought a great deal about what I did and what I should have done instead, and I don't think those two things are entirely separate. I made a choice that hurt people who had also hurt me, and I don't stand here and tell you it was the right choice, or the clean choice, or the choice a wiser man would have made. A wiser man would have sat Derek down in February and said, Son, I need to talk to you about something I've been carrying for a while. A wiser man would have said it years before February. I was not that wiser man. I was a 63-year-old with a quiet lake and a dog and a pension, and 16 years of checks written in the name of belonging to something that had stopped seeing me as a person somewhere, around year 3. And I need to own my part of that too. I let it happen. I said yes every time. I drove 9 hours on a bad knee because the dates were already set. I paid for people I didn't know and situations I didn't choose because I thought the alternative was to lose my family, and I confused having a family for being loved by one. You teach people how to treat you, and I spent 12 years teaching the people I loved most in the world that Gerald shows up and Gerald pays, and Gerald doesn't need to be asked how he's doing, as long as the cabin is reserved and the steaks are on the grill. 3 weeks after the 4th of July, my daughter Amanda called me. Not to talk about money, not to plan anything. She called on a Tuesday evening and she said, Dad, I've been thinking about what you said, about not feeling like a father at the reunions, about feeling like the man who pays for things. She paused, and then she said, I think I owe you an apology. It wasn't a perfect conversation. It was a little clumsy, and there were things left unsaid on both sides, and I don't want to make it into something prettier than it was. But it was real. She asked how I was doing, and she meant it. And I told her the truth that I was doing better than I had in years, that the cabin in Michigan had given me something back I hadn't realized was gone. Derek and I haven't spoken yet in the way that needs to happen. Maybe we will. Maybe it'll take longer. I understand that. He's a man who has his own pride and his own version of events, and I imagine in his version of events I am a difficult and confusing father who blindsided his family on a holiday weekend. I can hold both things, his version and mine, and try to find my way to the conversation that's waiting on the other side. But I'll tell you what I know for certain, friends. I know that the best 4th of July of the last 15 years was the one I spent alone at a lake in Michigan with a 10-day-old fishing rod and a dog who thought the dock was paradise. I know that the peace I felt on that porch at 6:45 in the evening, before the phone started ringing, was a kind of peace I had forgotten was available to me. I know that 63 is not old. It is old enough to stop apologizing for wanting to be seen as something more than the man who pays for things, but it is nowhere near too old to build something different. The cabin is booked again for next summer. Same lake. Same couple with the Wisconsin plates next door. Same Rusty, God willing. And if my family wants to find me, not because the reservation needs confirming, not because someone wants to know if everything's paid for, but because they want to sit with their father and their grandfather on a dock at the edge of a lake and watch the sun go down without checking their phones, they know where I'll be. The door to that cabin is not locked. It never was.